Aussies absolutely love hybrid vehicles. They promise significantly better fuel consumption figures over their petrol counterparts. But is that always the case in reality? Well, not necessarily. That's why today we've lined up both the petrol and the hybrid version of Honda's 11th generation Civic hatchback to see which is more efficient, and if the hybrid is indeed the most efficient, to find out if spending a little bit more at the showroom is ultimately going to save you money down the track in long-term running costs. Now, the Civic hatchback is a vehicle that we really do quite like here at Chasing Cars. You can see our separate full reviews on those on our website or our YouTube channel, but it's worth noting that this hybrid here is $55,000, and that is a drive-away cost, but it's still a pretty hefty one, and notably, it's $7,800 more expensive than the petrol version. However, by opting for the hybrid version, the average consumption claims drop from 6.4 to 4.3 litres per 100 kilometres driven, so on paper at least, you do stand to save a bit of money over the longer term. However, here at Chasing Cars, we don't like taking claims like that at face value. That's why myself, my colleague Zach Adkins, and Deputy Editor Kurt Dupre have all decided to head out and see if these fuel consumption claims stack up in the real world, and ultimately, which is the one that you should end up buying. Chasing Cars, honest reviews of your next car. Brought to you by So the rules for this comparison are pretty straightforward. We're conducting our test in and around the Sydney area and doing multiple urban and highway stints to make sure we're not rewarding the driving characteristics of one drivetrain over another. And some of you might have noticed we're using an odd number of people in this test, so every now and then we are having one person jump in the other vehicle to make sure that the payload burden is equal on both counts. Now, we could use the car's inbuilt trip computer to measure the fuel consumption of this vehicle. However, we've done multiple of these types of tests before, and in our experience, we've found that the trip computers aren't all that accurate. So instead, what we're doing is we're filling up the tank at the end of each leg until the fuel pump makes a second click, indicating that the tank is full. And by recording the amount of fuel that actually goes into the tank and the distance traveled by checking the odometer, we're able to come up with our fuel consumption figures. But anyway, those are the rules. Let's go see how these Civics perform on the road.
The test regime is simple: 50 kilometers of urban driving and 50 kilometers of highway driving to give us an honest combined figure over 100 kilometers. And we also compare urban highway results in isolation. First up, we note odometers and brim both cars' tanks on the same fuel pump to 2 clicks of the fuel nozzle. Then we set off on our 50k urban loop. A chosen loop keeps road speeds below 70 kilometers per hour and includes start-stop driving.
So Zach, you just climbed out of the hybrid, so what's that been getting?
So it's been indicated around town at about 5.1 litres per 100. It's actually dipping down closer to 4 litres per 100. I was just in the car before with TP, and it's doing pretty well, but that's kind of expected being the hybrid version of the Civic.
Alright, so it looks like around town we're sort of 5.1 for the hybrid and 6.5 for the petrol, so I guess we'll do our scientific refilling and we'll see if those numbers bear out in the real world. Yeah,
absolutely. Yep, we'll check back in a bit later on.
After the urban loop, we refuel both cars to 2 clicks on the same pump, recording odometer readings and the fuel consumed on each car. For accuracy, we use the point-to-point distance using electronic mapping data and not the car's odometers, which can prove inaccurate. Once fueled, we repeat the 50 kilometer trip for highway speed while maintaining speeds in 90 to 110 km per hour region, driving to the prevailing flow of the traffic. Once complete, we again brim the tanks and record fuel used and odometer readings, but again, we measure the combined consumption using electronic mapping data.
So here we are, we're in the Honda Civic petrol model. How's it going, Kurt?
Yeah, not too bad. We're currently just peeled off the motorway, but 100k zone, so yeah, it's reading 5.8 litres at the moment for a highway trip.
And how was it sort of looking in comparison when we were in the city? What was the car showing in terms of its claim?
It wasn't that much worse. It was around about 6.5 urban, and that's pretty much just a normal drive mode with stop-start activated for the traffic lights.
Do you think that we'll see any less than 5.8, you reckon, on the highway on the way back? Maybe.
Possibly. It's a bit of a hilly run here on the Newcastle freeway, so if we get some decent stints on cruise control, we might be able to dip down closer to 5.
We've sort of been seeing with the hybrid, which is directly behind us. Tom Place is driving the hybrid behind us on this little fuel economy loop, and and I think that's doing a little bit better, but we're going to wait and see what happens a bit further down the track.
Look, we're not paying any silly buggers at messing around with drive modes or anything like that. Realistically, we just leave it in normal mode like you would do on balanced driving. Leave the stop start on because that is the defaulted startup, and pretty much just drive normally with the prevailing conditions.
And we keep the aircon just on sort of regular, right?
Yep, aircon on auto, set to about 22 degrees, and happy days.
Great.
Our findings: across our urban loop, the petrol Civic returned 6.6 litres per 100 k's, while the hybrid returned 4.32 litres per 100 k's. For the highway loop, the petrol Honda returned 6.17 litres per 100 k's, while the hybrid returned 4.61 litres per 100 k's. The result? When calculated across our total testing distance, the petrol returned a combined figure of 6.39 litres per 100 k's, while the hybrid returned a more favourable 4.47 litres per 100 k's for the total test duration.
Which is, interestingly, for the hybrid a little bit more than its consumption claim, and for the petrol a little bit less than its consumption claim. Now, before we talk about whether the superior fuel consumption of the hybrid makes it worth the purchase over the petrol model, I should point out that the hybrid also nabs a few extra features like a panoramic sunroof, full leather interior, and some phone connectivity features to try and help make up some of that nearly $8,000 price difference. But ultimately, our results show that if you're driving 15,000 kilometers a year and paying for fuel at $2 a litre, you're going to take over 14 years to make up the cost difference between these two cars. So even still, if raw fuel consumption figures are all that you care about, then the hybrid is still obviously the clear winner here. However, as we often find when testing these sorts of vehicles, their value doesn't just come from their frugal fuel consumption. In practice, Honda's eHEV system is quiet, pretty punchy off the line, quite refined at speed, and in general, just a real pleasure to drive. However, I've been driving around this petrol version this week, and it's got a 1.5 litre turbo engine, and it's really quite refined as well. It might have a CVT, yeah, but the turbo keeps the revs nice and low, and you've got a good amount of power available all the time. Plus, as we've seen today, it's actually pretty fuel efficient for a pure petrol vehicle. So while the hybrid might be a little bit more refined, a little bit better to drive and things like that, I'm not sure it quite justifies that mammoth price gap on what is already a pretty expensive vehicle in petrol guise. So anyway, that's been our video today. What did you think of our test and the results that we got? Please just let us know in the comments down below. Don't forget to like and subscribe. But for now, that's all. Thank you for watching Chasing Cars.